I've taken 8 showers and I still feel soiled.
I'm sorry, that's because we're watching this episode?
Right, that's just a teaser for today's episode.
Gotcha.
Hey guys, this is the 4th episode of the Arkham Sessions. I am joined by my co-host, Brian Ward.
Hey everybody.
My name is Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Welcome to our 4th episode of the Arkham Sessions. We're returning to the Joker.
That's right. Taking a look at the episode The Last Laugh. It was the 4th production episode, but aired 15th.
I'm confused. So this was the 15th episode to air. But
Yeah.
it's the 4th episode in this DVD box set series that we have.
Correct, because it aired in September. It was September 22nd, 1992, but it was the 4th episode produced. So a lot of times you have a tendency to bump up what you think is your better episodes to the front, depending on how strong you think the episodes are.
Right. So in the production of this DVD set, they decided to put it 4th because it actually was
because it
very
actually
popular.
was the 4th episode produced.
Oh, I gotcha.
So they went in production order instead of air date order. Batman has zero sense of humor. I'm starting to worry about Batman. I'm starting to worry about Bruce Wayne, and maybe the writers don't like Batman nearly as much as one would think.
Well, I realize that.
Bruce has no sense of humor. In fact, Alfred even says so.
Not a funny bone in his entire body.
He might have a sense of humor, but he doesn't. He has the opposite of what I was talking about when it comes to emotional lability. Like, he might hold his emotions in. He may appear as though he's not reacting emotionally or that he doesn't have a wide spectrum of emotions. But in fact, he may be reacting, but he's taught himself to be a cool cucumber, which is actually a pretty effective way to, to interrogate others, to work with, other crime fighters. To basically, you don't want to show people your cards. You want to have that poker face. And, maybe he's gotten so used to that.
Yeah, because at the end of the episode, when he actually tries to pull a practical joke on Alfred.
Don't worry about it. I'll just take it out of your salary for the next couple of years.
Very well, son.
Alfred. April Fools.
It's mean.
Yeah, it's not a very funny April Fool's joke, which leads me to, I'm seeing a trend here. Everyone at home who is keeping up with the box scores, 3 episodes in a row that might suggest Bruce Wayne has antisocial personality disorder. So I'm just throwing that out there. So far, there's a lot of speculation on the doctor's side about Bruce keeping it in, but I'm actually seeing signs of Bruce having a problem.
He has to do his job, and part of his job is to not let his color show. He has to be somewhat, lacking emotions. He has to do this, at least to give the impression that he's not impacted or affected. Because the last thing he wants to do is to show villains how they can get to him. And I think to not get too close to emotions, because when he does that, he may be triggered. He may experience emotions that are unwanted and uncomfortable for him, like memories of past trauma. And I think it gets to certainly not a lack of ability or an inability to empathize with others, but perhaps a deficit. Like, he's not as good at this as other people.
That's my cue.
This episode of The Last Laugh, even though it features the Joker, doesn't really tell us much more about him.
No. It does in a way. It tells us that we may have been either wrong when we first took a look at the Joker in Christmas with the Joker, by thinking that he loved Batman, loved his family, wanted nothing but to be with his family, was murderous, but wasn't necessarily his end game. This episode is a little different in that regard. The Joker starts out with a heist. He brings a trash barge into Gotham City. The trash barge smells as bad as always, but this time might be a bit lethal. We see our first real sign of the Joker venom. And as it sweeps through the citizens of Gotham, they begin laughing uncontrollably and collapse. And everyone is affected by this. Well, most people are affected by this, including Alfred.
Right. There's a scene where Alfred is up in the library breaking pots and vases, and essentially he's been impacted by this.
Just a little spring cleaning, sir.
So the Joker is incapacitating people in Gotham City in order to rob them of their riches and things like that. We see scuba divers going down and collecting jewels and stuff from.
This is more of a classic, and to me, this is kind of that kind of action-packed. You know, the villain with his henchmen just trying to get gold. To get gold bars and sacks of money. And interestingly, the Batman is working solo. He's single-handedly trying to take down this group of villains, with, of course, the Joker being the mastermind. And there's not a lot of dialogue. There's certainly not a lot of interaction until the very end between the Joker and Batman. And what I think is, for me, what the big, I guess, the featured character is the music. There is this ongoing song that plays throughout the whole episode that's a little bit different than previous episodes.
Absolutely. It was composed by Shirley Walker and is definitely a very catchy theme. And seems to sort of be the Joker's theme in this particular episode. Every time we cut back to the Joker, we hear that theme. Not necessarily the theme that you would think would be attached to the Joker. It's a little dark, a little sinister.
Yeah, it's a little menacing, and it's sort of, of course, repetitive. And I know that when I saw this episode as a youngster, I was definitely pulled in by the music and found this episode to be, incredibly interesting and enthralling. Even though, as we're talking about it now, there's not a lot going on. It really is just a cat and mouse chase.
It is a very much more fantasy-driven episode. One of his henchmen on the boat actually even turns out to be a robot. Batman has to fight a robot. So it is much more fantasy-driven, this particular episode.
Right.
But this is our first opportunity to explore a character that we've explored before. So this is technically the Joker's second session with Dr. Andrea Letamendi. What is different about the Joker now than maybe he was in Christmas with the Joker? Have you seen anything transpire?
Well, it's April. So we know that it's because this episode takes place on April Fool's Day. Maybe we can assume that this is 3 months after Christmas with the Joker. And I think you're right about saying that he's less interested in connecting right now, that he's sort of fixated on this heist, and that he's just looking for personal gain, which is to acquire this money and to loot the city. And, I still think he gets something out of these crimes, and he's clearly getting something out of looting the city.
When the going gets tough, the tough go shopping.
But I don't think that he's not really obsessed right now with Batman. He doesn't care about Batman right now.
Yeah, and that's the part that I find interesting is the Christmas with the Joker, we had sort of determined at the end of that episode that the entire episode was as a way to get Batman in the room with him. And in this particular case, he kind of does away with Batman pretty early on. I mean, Captain Clown, the robot, stuffs Batman into a drum, stabs the drum with a knife, and they dump it into the ocean.
Oops! Looks like our air holes are too.
And they leave him there, and the barrel just, basically descends to the bottom of the river.
Right.
And
so that would sort of suggest that that the Joker was really just kind of out. I don't know if you could necessarily say that the Joker expected his old rival to get out of there. I think he was kind of doing away with Batman because he wanted whatever gain he could get from incapacitating the city and going, as he says, shopping. It's interesting. I'm looking at the original Batman the Animated Series Writer's Bible. And in talking about the Joker, they actually say, to our way of thinking, the Joker's one motivating objective is not to do in the Batman. Oh, he will try to kill him, but only as the coup de grace to a particularly inspired crime. And in this particular case, I think maybe this is a particularly inspired crime in that the Joker is sailing through Gotham on this trash barge and he is knocking out the entire city with his laughing venom. But the doing in of Batman isn't necessarily the coup de grace to that. Otherwise, he might feel fulfilled.
right.
They also mention... to him, if a crime isn't worth pulling off with panache, it isn't worth doing at all. It must also be noted that while the Joker is frightening and prone to psychotic, murderous mood swings, he is at times genuinely funny. I think maybe this episode leans more toward the former in that statement than the latter. He does make several jokes, but even his own henchmen on the barge sort of roll their eyes when he jokes. This one seems to be more of a murderous Joker than an actual jovial Joker that we may have seen in Christmas with the Joker.
Right. He still has these one-liners and these sort of quips that are they're horrible jokes, but for the Joker, they're consistent with his personality. But you're right. My understanding is that this laughing gas or this Joker gas ultimately will kill these citizens of Gotham City. Is that the understanding you have?
Yes.
Right. So in the beginning of this episode, Bruce Wayne is showering and hears on the radio that
Initial reports indicate that hundreds of Gothamites have inexplicably begun acting like total laughing fools.
And you're right. At some point, with prolonged exposure to this gas, the result will be permanent insanity. Now, there's no such thing as permanent insanity because insanity is a legal term. Insanity refers to, what lawyers will call.
This is another one of those cases where a lawyer may say you're insane in order to get you convicted of something, but
or get you off the hook for something.
Right.
Someone didn't willingly, they didn't have the motivation to do something.
Right.
When they're legally insane, they did not know what they were doing.
Right, but a psychologist won't say that you are...
Oh, absolutely not. You won't hear a psychiatrist or psychologist say that somebody is insane. It's just not a term that we use. But my understanding is that when we hear this in the episode, being permanently insane is that as we see, people are losing their capacity to behave in ways that they normally would. They're lacking their emotional ability. So they're laughing uncontrollably, laughing hysterically, and they're unable to, it's basically interfering with their functioning. And I think that's what they mean by permanent insanity.
So once again, Summer Gleason and the media are ill-informed.
Well, I don't know that
media.
Summer does her research.
And in fairness, she hasn't had time to do her research. It is a quick sweeping epidemic. So.
Now you mentioned a psychotic term in the Writer's Bible.
Yes.
And that's
that he has psychotic murderous mood swings.
And we've often seen this either in comic books or in the animated series where the Joker is referred to as the Psychotic Clown or even the Schizophrenic Clown. And interestingly, the term, of course, is a little bit misused in the sense that my understanding is what that means is that he's unpredictable and he's acting in ways that normal people don't act, right? That sort of general crazy description. But psychosis is a real thing. Psychosis is a mental state. It refers to a break in reality. So psychosis isn't a disorder in and of itself. Psychosis could accompany many, numerous disorders. And actually, any number of us could experience psychosis or psychotic symptoms, depending on what's happened to us, what injuries we've had, or what mental illnesses we might be prone to. So recently, I read an article that referred to people as psychotics, like that person is a psychotic. And that just drives me legally insane, because that's not a term. It's like calling someone, you've heard of manic depression.
Right.
To say that someone has a manic symptom is a genuine term. It's a genuine description. But someone is not a manic. Someone is a person with manic depression. So the same thing goes for psychosis or a psychotic symptom or a psychotic feature. You wouldn't say that person is a psychotic. You would say that person has psychotic symptoms or that person has psychotic features. And that's the appropriate way to use this terminology.
So psychotic doesn't actually mean one disorder. There are actually a number of ways in which anyone can show signs of psychotic behavior.
Yeah, think about it like anxiety. Of course, anxiety is way more common. But anxiety or being anxious is a state. It is a mental state. It's not a disorder. But then, of course, there's all these different anxiety disorders like social anxiety disorder and panic disorder, etc. Same thing for something like psychosis. Psychosis is not a mental illness, it's a state. So, for instance, you might take some drugs and experience psychotic symptoms. You might have a head injury, have a stroke, and you could experience psychotic symptoms. Again, psychotic symptoms simply meaning you have a break from reality. You could have one or both of these things, delusions or hallucinations. Delusions are false beliefs. So you have the conviction that something's happening and it's really not. Hallucinations, as you know, is seeing or hearing something that actually isn't there. So that simply means that, you could see things or hear voices or have this strong belief that something's happening, and that is not happening in reality. And those are psychotic features or psychotic symptoms. That doesn't mean that you have schizophrenia. That doesn't mean that you have a delusional disorder. It simply means that that's your mental state. And further information needs to be gathered about you to figure out, what's causing, what are the factors that are causing those psychotic symptoms. And as I said, could be anything from head injury, stroke, brain tumor, could be drug related, alcohol related. And there are a lot of mood disorders that accompany psychotic features, and that could be severe depression. Some folks, when they're depressed, actually hear voices or see things that aren't there, or have a break from reality in that way. Manic depression or bipolar disorder is another mood disorder where you might see some psychotic features. So just in explaining that, I wanted to make sure that folks know that, like, when you hear psychotic, like someone is psychotic or someone has psychotic symptoms, that doesn't mean they have schizophrenia. That means that they're experiencing these set of symptoms where they have this break from reality.
So let's talk a little bit about the Joker's venom.
Mm-hmm.
This is a toxin that is much like the Scarecrow's toxin, something that is a work of fiction.
Right. Luckily.
I mean, we do know of things like laughing gas, which rarely ever, causes uncontrollable laughter. But we do know of there are certainly people who have died with permanent grins or smiles on their faces.
What?
Yeah, it's that is actually called rictus grin. It's also it's originated.
I'm sorry, Rick who?
You've been rictus grin rolled. It's rictus grin. It's Rhizus sardonicus. But it's a condition that's essentially your muscles spasm. It places your face into a permanent smile. But it's certainly not instantaneous the way that the Joker's gas works. Other things actually can cause rictus grin. Tetanus, strychnine poisoning will do it. In fact, there's a story called the Sign of the Four. That's a old Sherlock Holmes story where Watson actually uses that to eventually come to the determination that the victim was killed with strychnine poisoning.
So, I mean, this poisoning essentially impacts the neurotransmitters in someone's brain.
Absolutely.
Those neurotransmitters are the ones responsible for controlling muscle movement. And it sounds like what that does is it creates this permanent locking of the muscles, specifically in the face.
Yes.
But I'm not hearing that there's laughter involved with this.
Yeah, I can't think of anything that would actually, if you were to create a gas that could, like an aerosol for strychnine, or a way to create some sort of gas that could give you tetanus, you would have to figure out a very creative way to work in the laughter. I mean, there are diseases that are partially symptoms can be uncontrollable, spontaneous, uncontrollable laughter. I mean, there's the old disease kuru.
Kuhu?
Kuru, which actually it's probably most famous as having been people found it in Papua New Guinea, mid 20th century, I believe, and but a lot of people think that may have been as a result of cannibalism throughout these tribes in Papua New Guinea. A lot of people think that it started with cannibalism, but possibly that someone may have eaten another person who had another disease. So it's not something that is necessarily something that you could weaponize,
Right.
And even still, it's not going to kill you instantaneously.
Well, finding that is actually very rare, as far as seeing someone with incontrollable laughter or inappropriate laughter. But it does happen. In my practice, oftentimes when we would do assessments and evaluations for folks that have had brain injuries or strokes or any kind of head trauma, we would run tests to ensure that folks were reacting with appropriate emotional states. And sometimes you will encounter a patient who will react with inappropriate emotions. So that there are some neurocognitive conditions where this is more common, but we'd see folks who, would have laughter, for instance, when they hear something sad, or the opposite, something is particularly funny and they have uncontrollable crying spells. So that emotional ability, that certainly is something that happens. It's certainly a phenomenon.
And in 2009, researchers actually found a plant that they believe caused rictus granus, water dropwort, which is a neurotoxic plant that was actually used for ritual killings, primarily of the elderly, in pre-Roman Sardinia. So
maybe the Joker could hook up with Poison Ivy. She could procure this plant and, give him the toxin to use, and then he could create this gas from it. And that might be a more realistic
and
way to do this.
It might also explain why our next villain is in fact Poison Ivy.
Oh.
I know. Like a little segue there.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, check us out next week for episode 5, where we'll visit with Poison Ivy. As always, I'm Brian Ward, along with co-host Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
The hysterical lunatic.
We'll talk about that one at another time. Wishing you guys a good week, and we will see you for next week's The Arkham Sessions.